The next session, please. Please, can we get seated to get ready for the next session? Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you. Ladies and gents, we are ready for the next session. Please, can we settle down? Thank you, everybody. Thank you very much. Thanks a lot to the previous panel and to Audrey for a really engaging panel, and of course to the audience. The questions were very interesting and very engaging. Thank you very much for that. And for our next session, we're going to have a solo speaker. He will be chatting to us about investment opportunities in Africa's education sector. His name is Sudeep Lad, and he's a partner at LEK Consulting. He's a founding member and leader of the global education practice at LEK. Sudeep has delivered over 200 cases in the education sector and led more than 100 engagements across more than 30 geographies in emerging markets. Sudeep leads the education work in Africa, where he has extensive contact network. He has led engagements in more than 15 African countries, where he has worked closely with private equity clients, tertiary institutions, and pathway providers. He also resides in South Asia and leads multiple on-the-ground engagements in the region. Sudeep has extensive experience across all education segments and has an expertise in K-12, higher education, transnational education, TVET, and EdTech. Over to you, Sudeep.
Thank you for the great introduction. Hope everyone can hear me well. So we heard the last panel, the capital market experts talking a lot about the sentiment. The mood of the panel really was a mixed one. So let me try and enthuse a little bit more of optimism into opportunities in our beloved continent. And I'm choosing, based on my work, I'm choosing a sector which is really the sunrise sector for the economy, which is education. Before we get there, I think introductions are in order. We are a global strategy consulting firm, about 20 offices globally. End up doing a lot of work, in the education practice. We have one of the largest dedicated education sector advisory team globally, with about 100 plus consultants focusing on education vertical. We have deep expertise and experience in Africa. All the countries that you see in green here are the countries where we have done on-ground education projects. The nature of the sector that we work in, which is education sector, tends to be very local in terms of market nuances, and hence, going deep in these markets is quite important. What you see on this chart is on the first column, all the subsectors of education where we work in, which ranges from early years K through 12 all the way up to higher ed, tertiary, vocational, and EdTech. And on that, on the horizontal axis, you see the countries of coverage. Within Africa, we have done work, as was mentioned, in more than 15 plus geographies. Some of our clients and our network, who we work with, which is a mix of operators and investors, as well as impact investing world, where we also support a lot of multilateral banks such as AFSIC and other institutions. What I'm going to cover today is really, let's take a very quick view of what is the kind of investment activity we have seen on the continent. So we are talking about, and then we will go about, talking about some of the actionable opportunities that investors sitting in this room can access based on what we have seen in the market. So if we look at investment activity, and this focused on education sector, focuses on disclosed deals where there were reported disclosed deal values. So we see that and we profiled this over the 5-year period. We see there is a tremendous growth in terms of number of deals, and about $500 million of investment has gone into education sector over the last 5 years. Some of the market deals you can see on the right, which tells us that now the ticket sizes are also on the rise, and we can hear about $50 to $100 million of deal, which is actually not a typical for a sector like education. This picture is the geography lens of where the opportunities are and where the investment capital is being deployed. So no surprises there, but Egypt and South Africa are leading the way, and we see that these two markets offer scalability of education businesses, and hence private capital is following that. And why it happens? Because in the world of education, price points are an important determinant of scale, and both the markets that you see in the top, which is Egypt and South Africa, tend to demonstrate healthier price points than the rest of the continent, and hence the investment activity. We have Tunisia, Morocco, Kenya, but by and large we could see that that southern part of Africa, North Africa are seeing more activity than we have seen in West Africa and East Africa. This is a subsector lens of the investment activity. So what we see here is that higher education, which is really the universities, the colleges, that sector has shown massive scale, and it's way ahead of other sectors such as K-12 or EdTech in the overall scheme of things. And why this happens, again, higher education or universities is a sector where scalability is achieved much more than a sector like K-12. And the reason being that in higher education or in vocational education or tertiary, any form of tertiary education, you can have greater single site scalability. On one universities we have seen there are 8,000 students, 10,000 students, and this is not completely unheard of in even markets like Africa. So there you go. You see higher ed is leading the pack. What are we seeing in terms of the functional themes in the market? So you see that there is participation both from strategics as well as financial sponsors. If we talk about strategics, existing platforms are diversifying within the region. So you talk about large education platforms like Kuro and Edutech in the context of South Africa. Stadio is the third one now in the higher ed. Honoris, the largest Pan-African platform, is deepening its presence in various markets in Africa. The second big theme that you see out here is there is some interest from global brands looking at Africa in a bit more active manner. Is it huge? No, it's not large today, but we are seeing some participation with some older investments like To Use investment in Get Smarter, LCI's investment in HEM in Morocco, and certain others where there is some activity from global operators or brands looking and entering into African markets. And then obviously PE investors have picked up whatever is available of scale. And finally, this is quite important, that Africa is also emerging as a hotbed for innovation for the broader education sector, not just Africa but globally. So you see some good online education models like UniCaf, some other TVET models which are evolving in that segment of the education. Over the next 5 minutes, we'll talk about some of these themes, but essentially K-12 and higher ed are the sectors where we see these are the sectors which have demonstrated scale and hence are ripe for investment activity. These are the sectors where the participation from consumers or parents or students is less discretionary and it's more in the sort of realm of mandatory education. Then there are a few emerging segments like TVET and early childhood education. We'll briefly touch upon that. And cutting across all the sectors here, we have education technology. Like what we are seeing in the world of education globally, even in Africa, we can see some activity from EdTech where there's been some venture capital participation. So let's pick up these themes one by one. On the K-12 sector, this chart shows the premium K-12 market, which is schools which are above certain price points, say $3,000 of annual tuition fee. So the market is quite big if we cut it across Africa, but happens to be quite fragmented. So there will be opportunities for investors when they pick up 1 or 2 or 3 school groups or school chains as they enter into the market. But what we are excited much more about is the mid-price and the budget K-12 segment. Given the affordability levels in the continent, the addressable market suddenly expands if you are able to bring the school from $3,000 to $5,000 all the way up to $1,000 to $2,000. And of course, the public school system is suffering in most parts, and budget mid-price K-12 offers an alternative to struggling public education. What kind of innovation we have seen? So there's greater use of technology. There is more templatized around teacher training and equipping the teacher in the classroom much more. And finally, these are all asset-light models, operating either in rental premises, smaller premises, where the focus is much more on academic as opposed to huge infrastructure. And there are some evidence of success. So there are a few groups which are mentioned here: Nova Pioneer, Holgate, and then even the established brands are getting more into the mid-price segment, as you can see from the examples of Kuro and Edutech. In higher ed, again, very exciting sector. We are seeing huge platforms. The largest Pan-African platform, Honoris, and some of the members in the room know that, and are previous owners of that business, has achieved $200 million top line plus and about 80 million plus EBITDA, just on the back of higher education in the continent. Technology is emerging in a big way. We are seeing existing providers like education universities. They are using distance learning or blended learning, but then it goes all the way up to pure play online degrees, which are also emerging well in the continent. And then we have upskilling providers, which is again a big sector, which is tackling the problem of the huge unskilled labor force, and they're trying to upskill using specific models, examples being Moringa and Andela. TVET is a large sector, yet to see some scalable business models, but presents huge unmet opportunity. I think the solutions here will need to come from both public and private sector coming together. Similar constraint happens even in early childhood education, where we see that the gross enrollment ratios in early childhood education in African countries are very low, and that would suggest that there's not enough provision for early childhood education in the continent, and this presents opportunities for investors and operators. The sector, however, is very, very fragmented, and hence scalability is challenging. There are few innovations which are happening where governments are trying to get into the PPP routes and invite private providers. There's an employer-supported model in childcare, which is globally well observed, but yet to pan out in Africa. But these are some of the themes that can be looked into as operators and investors look at the sector more closely. So in summary, what we would say is that there's very strong demand and large addressable market for K-12 models in the mid-price and the budget segment. The second big theme that we are coming up with is that the traditional higher education segment is tried and tested. There's more runway for that segment, but new age models which are using technology, online education, are likely to emerge. Upskilling and lifelong learning is a big theme. We are seeing tech-led models in this space. In the blue-collar vocational, however, there is huge demand, but we are not seeing enough examples of business model scalability which are coming our way. Early childhood education we quickly talked about. There's opportunity in the sector, and finally technology is being used increasingly in a way that it will leapfrog some of the problems of Africa in terms of access to education. And we expect that that this will emerge in a more meaningful way over the next decade or so. Finally, I would end up with a couple of last thoughts, which is, an Africa strategy is not really a pan-Africa strategy. There are a lot of regional variations when we look at North Africa, very different from the context in South Africa, and hence there's no one-size-fits-all kind of an approach that investors need to take. Africa as a continent is huge. If we cut it by addressable market, by population, by affordability, what we will find is that the opportunity exists in few cities within Africa, where the addressable market is relatively larger than other cities, and hence it needs to be a much more concerted city by city or country by country strategy as opposed to a pan-Africa strategy. And finally, as investors and operators get into education, there are many levers of value creation that exist, which are around pricing, student acquisition, greater engagement with employers to enhance the employability outcomes for students, and greater customer advocacy. And using all of this, one can create scale and really develop a platform which is being demonstrated by certain platforms. With this, I'll end the session because I see there's a time check there. Happy to take, if we have time, a couple of questions.
Successfully? Okay, so yeah, would you be interested in partnering with existing schools that are quite successful across Kenya, perhaps to help invest into Africa? And also, what do you think about progressing or, the connection to university studies? I see quite a few schools do well at the level of primary, maybe high school, but how about if a school wanted to then develop a uni?
Sure. So to your first question, so many business models that have emerged is investors partnering with such school groups, like K-12 school groups, and acquiring local schools. So there will be interest in the investor community, depending on, in K-12 context, it is important to understand the micro catchment where the schools are, and what micro catchment are they serving, what scalability are schools demonstrating. That is important to consider. But for sure, like K-12 has a lot of interest, and if there are good schools with good outcomes, there will be demand. And using those good brands, one can expand into other parts of Kenya. Let's say if you're in Nairobi, but you can expand to some of the other neighboring cities as well. I think to your other question, the dropout rates are significantly higher in public education. Private education typically does a good job of progressing students to from primary to middle to high school, and we have seen that most private schools, be it international curriculum or local curriculum, they have actually differentiated on the back of these outcomes. And outcomes means two things. One is progression from primary to middle to high school, but also at high school level, one can very well measure performance in local university entrance exams as well as in O levels, A levels, if it's an international school.
Yeah, okay, let me just clarify that. The cost of study out of the country is very high. So what I'm asking is to have the local international schools starting university studies as well locally, because the assumption is that they have to go out of the country.
Got it. Yeah, there are education businesses which try and go from, and they cater to multiple segments within education, be it K-12 and higher ed. But what we've seen is, again, as a business opportunity, one can consider both. There are not a lot of synergies between K-12 and higher education, because higher education universities have to be good to attract students, and if the university is good, it will attract students not just from K-12 schools of the same owners, but even other K-12 schools. So, but it certainly is an opportunity. If there's an education business which is in K-12, they can sort of expand into higher ed. Are we done with the time? Okay. Thank you. I'm in the conference, so if anybody is interested, happy to share more perspectives in the coffee area. Thank you.